Listen to this story all the way to the end, not to find out who fired the first shot, but to understand exactly what happens when power arrogantly believes it can master fear, only to watch fear switch sides. At 2:47 in the morning, Ouagadougou is completely silent. It is a heavy, tense, artificial silence. Then a single gunshot tears right through it, sharp, dry, and absolutely final. Inside a private chamber, Ibrahim Traoré is standing tall. He isn't fleeing, he isn't panicking, and he certainly isn't waiting for an attack from the outside. He instantly recognizes something else entirely. It is betrayal coming from within. His security chief speaks fast about attackers, mentioning armed men breaching the north gate, but Traoré doesn't ask how many there are. He asks just one single piercing question. Who among my own people is with them? At that exact moment, power stops being just a job function. It becomes a brutal equation: who is still commanding when orders have been sold, who protects when the hierarchy is corrupt. The conspirators' plan is simple. Eliminate the man, install a docile puppet leader, and cut off all resources before dawn breaks. A quick, surgical, almost administrative operation. Traoré understands the stakes immediately. His death isn't the final goal. It is merely a passageway, a switch to be flipped. He refuses to run, not out of heroism, but because he knows that a state running away with its president has already fallen. When he tells his officers to hold the line at all costs, it's not a slogan. It's a calculated, strategic decision. Buy time, create a fatal flaw in their scripted scenario. At this precise moment, no one can yet imagine what will happen at 3:15 a.m. Not the attackers, not foreign analysts, and not even him. But the night in Ouagadougou hasn't revealed its true weapon yet. Can you feel where this story starts to go off the rails? Then, tell us in the comments, because what happens next looks like no classic coup d'etat anyone has ever seen. At 3:15, the plan cracks. Not by a military maneuver, not by a counter-order, but by something no one had calculated. Silhouettes appear on the outskirts of the palace, first just a few, then in dozens, then hundreds. Farmers, students, shopkeepers, unarmed, leaderless, and without any written plan. They advance through the darkness like a slow wave, undisciplined, but absolutely determined. On the surveillance screens, the security chief freezes solid. He shows the footage to Traoré. A human tide is forming outside. Farming tools, iron bars, hastily makeshift signs. An elderly woman steps forward from the crowd. She positions herself right in front of the mercenaries. She screams, "This country is not for sale." In that instant, the balance of power changes its very nature. It is no longer an attack against a man. It is a confrontation between two legitimacies. The insurgents hesitate. They had anticipated fear. Instead, they find presence. Traoré watches without speaking. He understands before the others do. These civilians aren't obeying any orders. They are answering an instinct to protect what they now consider their collective property. Power is no longer confined to a command room. It overflows, it becomes flesh and blood. That is when Traoré makes the most incomprehensible decision for a military manual: open the gates. A murmur of disbelief sweeps through the room. To open is to expose oneself. To open is to lose control. To open is to risk total chaos. But to close them is to accept a clean war. And that night, Traoré understands that this war will be neither clean nor predictable. The gates slowly open and the civilians flood in. A student, a laborer, a mother. The line of defense stops being military. It becomes communal. The mercenaries can no longer distinguish targets. Weapons lose their clarity. Confusion sets in. If you think power relies solely on weapons, say it now, because those who follow are about to seriously put that idea to the test. Traoré looks at a young soldier. In his eyes, he no longer sees fear. He sees something else. A dawning certainty. Betrayal is no longer the heart of the story. The real battle begins right here. Everything accelerates the moment the gates open. What was supposed to be a silent operation becomes living chaos. In the courtyard, a mechanic strikes a masked man with a wrench. Students block the corridors, arms crossed, refusing to back down. A grandmother picks up stones and throws them without even trembling. They don't have weapons, but they have numbers, and above all, they have audacity. The mercenaries fire into the air, no one moves. They fire at the ground, the crowd still advances. Inside, an officer shouts, "Mr. President, they're hesitating." That sentence changes everything. An armed force that hesitates has already lost the initiative. Traore grabs a microphone. His voice travels through jury-rigged radios and makeshift loudspeakers. It cuts through a still-sleeping Ouagadougou. Brothers and sisters, go back to your homes. This is not your war. I cannot accept that you die for me. A few seconds of silence, then a response carried by a megaphone. We are already home, Mr. President. Burkina Faso is our house. That voice belongs to Amyata, a schoolteacher. Perched precariously atop a vehicle, face taut with tension, tears mingling freely with sweat. Behind her, dozens take up the cry, and then hundreds. The crowd's energy shifts dramatically. From defensive, it becomes conquering. The mercenaries fall back. Their entire strategy relied on fear. Now they face an intangible mass they cannot grasp. They are no longer confident attackers. They have become intruders. Traoré murmurs almost to himself. This is no longer a siege. It is a full-blown uprising. At 3:45 a.m. communications explode. More than 2,000 calls in under 30 minutes. Parents, friends, neighbors. Without a designated leader, a network forms. A spontaneous coordination, unpredictable and rapid. No military manual predicts this. At 4 a.m., the first loyal units arrive at the periphery, triggered by an encrypted order sent in urgent haste. 60 kilometers covered at record speed. The balance of power flips instantly. It is no longer a bastion to be besieged, it is a reconquest. To the east, Captain Dia retakes the military headquarters. Colonel Zongo is arrested, caught in the act of burning documents. 9 minutes, not a single shot fired this night, reveals a brutal truth. The conspirators had bet everything on paralysis. They triggered an awakening, and this awakening will not stop here. As dawn approaches, another battle begins, not in the palace courtyards, but in the interpretations. Very quickly, certain observers speak of emotion, not strategy. They say that letting civilians into a military site is a grave error, a security breach, a reckless risk. According to them, this night proves one thing: a state too fragile to defend itself alone, a power resting excessively on the charisma of one man. The argument is clean, logical, and reassuring for those who prefer known patterns, but the facts tell a different story. First, the loyal units were not absent. They had been voluntarily distanced by fraudulent orders, a manipulation revealed later by internal investigations. Furthermore, the popular mobilization did not substitute itself for the army. It filled a temporary tactical void long enough to preserve the chain of command, long enough to permit the return of faithful forces. Finally, the post-crisis data is indisputable. No major institutional building lost, no sensitive zone compromised, no rupture of strategic control. What happened was not anarchy. It was an unexpected form of order born of trust. At that moment, the gaze shifts. We speak less of the man. We begin to see the system. In the heart of the confusion, a discovery emerges. 3 of the most faithful officers had been removed from the capital less than 72 hours before the attack. The signature is clear. Colonel Zongo, this isn't negligence, it's a prior neutralization. An administrative betrayal, silent and precise. This detail could have shattered the power structure. Instead, it produces the opposite effect. Identifying the treason means retaking the initiative. Loyalty ceases to be blind. It becomes conscious, informed, and indignant. At this instant, the logic changes. It is no longer about surviving, it is about responding. The counteroffensive begins without official announcements, without speeches. It starts with targeted arrests, with a retaking of control over flows, with an immediate reorganization. If you think this night is just an isolated episode, ask yourself the question now, because what is being triggered here will extend far beyond the palace walls. The betrayal was only the beginning. The recomposition of power has just been engaged. The consequences do not wait. They strike fast and they strike wide. In less than 1 week, the central figures of the plot fall one after the other. Without staging, without triumph, Colonel Zongo arrested while burning documents. General Urago intercepted with liquid cash. Commander Cabaret located in a safe house, still in the middle of coordinating. These arrests do not merely re-establish order, they expose the sheer scale of the internal decomposition. This was not an isolated incident, it was a vast network. By the very next day, a counter-espionage cell is formed, placed directly under presidential authority. Not to reassure, but to clean house. For the state, the shock is immediate. For the economy, it is brutal. Local businessmen are implicated, financing logistics weapons. Certain foreign mining companies, never officially named, see their contracts suddenly suspended. Audits are launched and the message is clear. The status quo is no longer guaranteed. The markets react without delay. A drop in the sub-regional stock index, a temporary freeze on new investments. Fear changes camps once again. But the most profound impact is neither financial nor diplomatic. It is psychological. This people who interpose themselves between the bullets and the palace understands something vital. He is no longer sitting on the sidelines as a mere spectator. In the days following the event, more than 2,000 citizen collectives have risen up, stretching from Koudougou all the way to Fada. We are seeing public forums and spontaneous assemblies everywhere. The demands are crystal clear: a full audit of the public budget and serious protection for whistleblowers. Silence is simply no longer acceptable here. Across the entire region, the echo of this movement is spreading fast. In Niger and Mali, popular movements are claiming the spirit of the Night of Ouagadougou, not to imitate it, but to rightfully claim it as their own. Inside certain diplomatic circles, people are whispering about an unexpected phenomenon. It is not a contagion of instability, but rather a contagion of resistance. The name Ibrahim Traoré is shifting in status. It is spoken less, yet it is becoming more symbolic. He is no longer just a charismatic military figure. He is becoming the tipping point of a much larger story, that of a president supported by his population, not one hiding behind his palace walls. 3 potential scenarios are now beginning to emerge. The first is progressive stabilization reforms actually applied, public trials held, and transparency strictly watched by the citizens. The second is gridlock. The fervor dies down, the institutions push back, and fatigue sets in. The third scenario is resurgence. An underground network of disinformation, a new kind of coup that is more discreet and legalistic, rising against these hypotheses. But one truth stands undeniable. The survival of one man does not guarantee the survival of a whole system. That night proved one thing: a people can rise up in just a few hours. But remaining standing demands something else entirely. If you had to choose which of these scenarios seems most probable to you, say it right now, because that choice reveals a lot about your vision of power. The Night of Ouagadougou opened a breach. What follows next will determine if it becomes a gateway to the future or just a brief pause in history. At this stage, the question is no longer what happened. The question is what that night forces us to rethink. Because the event in Ouagadougou is not limited to a failed coup d'etat, it exposes a much deeper crack in the way power is conceived, exercised, and protected. For decades, stability has been defined by one thing: control. Control of the weapons, control of the cash flow, control of the narratives. That night, a different model appeared. Imperfect, risky, but very real. Popular mobilization does not replace the state. It puts it to the test. It reveals what holds strong and what is rotting from the inside. The criticisms persist. They say this dynamic is dangerous, that raw emotion cannot govern, that the street cannot build structure. They are right on one point. Momentum alone is not enough, but they are ignoring the most essential part. What happened here was not a popular seizure of power, it was a reintegration. The citizens didn't take over the institutions, they stopped them from falling. This nuance changes everything, because from this point on, a new requirement sets in. Vigilance can no longer be just occasional, it must become a daily duty. The recommendations made after the fact are not ideological, they are mechanical. Strengthening administrative transparency, publishing the budgets, opening decisions to public eyes, reorganizing the army, increasing rotations, breaking clan logic, and creating independent surveillance mechanisms. Not just to punish, but to actually prevent. Encouraging local participation, reconnecting the state to the regions, and transforming citizen presence into a structured dialogue. These are heavy, slow, and comfortable steps to take, but the alternative is well known. It always wears the same face: the return of silence followed by the return of conspiracies. As the analysis deepens, one fact stands out. The center of gravity has shifted. We talk less about Traoré and more about the social fabric, its capacity to react without orders, to discipline itself without a boss. This shift is irreversible because once a people discovers it is an active player, it never surrenders again. The real stake isn't the next attack. It is the duration, the consistency, the ability to turn an exceptional night into ordinary practice. Ouagadougou didn't just resist. It posed a question to the entire continent, and that question can no longer be ignored. At daybreak, the images circled the country, then the continent, and then beyond, civilians forming a human shield, an open palace, a crowd that refuses to flee. For many, these are images of courage. For others, these are dangerous images. In certain international circles, the unease is palpable. What happened in Ouagadougou doesn't fit into any classic category. It is neither a successful coup d'etat nor a popular insurrection in the traditional sense. It is a counter-model, a signal sent without an official press release, without a diplomatic summit, without a mediator. The message is simple. An African state does not always react as predicted. An African people is not just a variable to be adjusted. In economic forums, the discussions are changing their tone. They talk less about abstract security risks and more about legitimacy, trust, and social depth. In the chancelleries, some are worried not about the instability, but about the example it sets. Because what played out that night goes far beyond one country. It questions the entire architecture, one where security is designed without society and where governance attempts to negotiate without the citizens. Gradually, the narrative begins to transform, and the name Ibrahim Traoré recedes further into the background. He is no longer the center of attention. He is becoming a mere crossing point in the larger story. The tension shifts elsewhere, focusing on this collective capacity to say no, to intervene without orders, and to stop without tipping into chaos. For the African youth, the effect is immediate. Social media is absolutely catching fire. Not around a man, but around an idea that loyalty is not submission. It can actually be resistance. This idea is circulating too fast to be controlled and too deeply to be erased. But an idea alone cannot govern. It demands a sequel, and that is precisely where the tension returns. Because transforming a sudden jolt into a long-term trajectory is always harder than just resisting for a single night. Ouagadougou has shown what is possible, but it has not yet proven that it is durable. History is not suspended. It is waiting. What follows will decide if this night remains a symbol or becomes a precedent. The night has passed, but the chapter has not closed. Before the monument erected for the fallen civilians, the silence feels different today, heavier, more demanding. The names engraved in the stone do not just tell a story. They remind us of a price paid not for a man, but for an idea that the nation is not a backdrop, and it belongs neither to the weapons, nor the offices, nor the secret deals. It belongs to those who defend it when the rules cease to function. In this moment, the presidential figure fades almost entirely. What remains is a collective responsibility, one that is immense and uncomfortable, because saving a state in one night is possible, but transforming it is much harder. The mobilization that surprised the world cannot remain just a one-time exception. If it fades, the system will close back up silently and methodically. The vigilance that protected a palace must now inhabit the schools, the markets, the offices, and the barracks. Every daily decision becomes political, and every act of giving up becomes political too. This is where history hardens, when emotion gives way to endurance, when momentum must turn into discipline, and when participation must survive without urgency. Ouagadougou has not offered a recipe, it has laid down an obligation. To all those watching from the outside, the message is clear: the balance of power must be rethought. To those living here, the question is more direct and disturbing. What do we do now that we know standing up is possible? If this night has marked you, do not let it become just a memory. Follow what comes next, because the history starting now is happening far away from the cameras.